So thank you. However, let's start the second session, and the second session starts with the presentation prepared by Marianna Janakone. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Yes.
And the presentation is called Florio'S Folio, the Hunt for Literary Identity. So I should say the floor is yours, Marianna.
Hi. Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be at this conference. Can you see my computer, my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's all visible.
Okay, so I will talk about John Florio and his lost library. First of all, who was John Florio? John Florio is considered one of the most outstanding interpreters of Italian humanistic culture in Elizabethan England. He published two Italian-English language lessons manuals. In 1598, he published the first Italian-English dictionary, a word of words, that he augmented in 1611, adding more than 150,000 English words. John Florio is considered the third greatest linguist of English language after Chaucer and Shakespeare. In 1663, he published the first English translation of Montaigne essays, which is considered the most important translation in Elizabethan period. In 1625, feeling death approaching and after decades of book collecting, John Florio wrote his testament and he bequeathed his library to William Herbert, the third Earl of Pembroke. He mentions 340 books, Italian, French, Spanish books, and an unbound volume of diverse written collections and rhapsodies. But the executors named in the will for uncertain reasons renounced execution. So since then, John Florio's entire library, along with his manuscripts, have disappeared, and very few scholars have paid attention to such an unhappy loss. Today I will show you few books that have been discovered from Florio's lost library. They uncover his broader and less known literary activities. First of all, the first book that was discovered from Florio's library is his copy of Chaucer Canterbury Tales. This book was discovered by Francis Amelia Yates, John Florio's scholar. This book was printed by Nicholas Hill in 1550 and was edited by William Tyne and was discovered by Francis Yates in the catalogue of William Robinson in 1932, offered for sale. Later, this book was owned by Peter Harrington, and in 2019, the book ended up at the Yale University Library. This book uncovers Florio's working method, how he borrowed words from his favorite authors. For example, from Chaucer, from this copy of Chaucer Canterbury Tales, we can see that Florio mostly borrowed sexual and erotic words that he used in his dictionary, a word of words that constitute a key feature. Erotic and sexual words constitute a key feature of Florio's dictionary. Most of the erotic words are borrowed from Chaucer Canterbury Tales. There are some examples: monina, brina, conno. And the same Italian word, fotere, contains many English words that Florio borrowed from Chaucer, like wife, like occupy. These are words that Chaucer used several times. There is a second book that unveils Florio's working method. It is a copy of his English translation of Montaigne essays. John Florio published this translation in 1963, and in the epistle to the reader, he underlined that there were some errors in some editions of his work. His statement that in London he had followed some of these editions can be attested by a copy that today is at Haddington Library. This copy contains a highly detailed and extensive correction in a careful italic hand, which is a further indicator of the scrupulous care with which Florio approached his work. In some cases, he used the marginal flower, adding extra sentences or editing existing ones. In others, he corrected typos or changed a word for another. This copy also proves that Florio was involved with the supervision of the first two editions of Montaigne's essays, even if he died before the appearance of the third. There is another copy of the same work that was also corrected by Florio personally. It contains hand corrections by Florio, and this book was given as a gift to Thomas Egerton, Lord Keeper of England, warmly inscribed this book with this Italian dedication, the gift of his dearest friend Giovanni Florio, January 63. And here we enter another section of John Florio's library, books that are powerful registers of identity and sentimentality, because considering that a book must be understood not merely as a source for ideas and images, but as a carrier of relationships, complex relationship of Renaissance friendship and patronage were captured by descriptions on books that were given as a gift. And as a man who delighted in books, Florio was delighted by receiving them, and they also call attention to new puzzling connections with his contemporaries. For example, his copy of Chaucer, discovered by Francis Amelia Yates, contained an inscription, John Florio, ex dono John Donne. This man, John Donne, was a personality that Yeats was not able to trace in Florio's inner circle. Another interesting and obscure relationship uncovered through an inscription in one of Florio's lost books that was discovered by another scholar is his copy of Benedetto Varchi Ercolano. Benedetto Varchi was an Italian writer, a poet, and he was notorious for his many salacious sonnets for young boys, although his loves were not always reciprocated. He published Ercolano in 1560 in the form of a dialogue between the author, the poet, and the Earl Ercolano. And this book contains an inscription that was discovered by Ben Jonson scholar Willie Bang in 1996. John Florio's book ended up at Louvain University Library in Belgium, and this book contains an inscription, Giovanni Florio's and his friends. This book was given to Florio by a certain Sir Robert Smith with a most indissoluble noct forever nicked in Oxford, 1583. The dramatic history of the Louvain Library started in 1795, when thousands of books were confiscated and brought to France. With World War I and World War II, thousands of books and manuscripts were destroyed. I have done a research, and unfortunately this book is not longer at Louvain Library. So we don't know how and when Florio's book ended up in Belgium from London. But what is significant is how it was possible to trace its history only thanks through that inscription left by Florio hundreds of years before, because without that indissoluble note with that Robert Smith established through gift exchange, that book would have been certainly picked by Ben Jonson scholar Willie Bang, but soon put back in the library and perishing under the rubble of a devastating attack, and definitely removing every possible chance to trace it again. Why Willie Bang was interested in John Florio? Because there is a connection between Ben Jonson and John Florio. They were friends and they collaborated extensively at court. In 1664, John Florio became groom of the Privy Chamber and private secretary to Queen Anne of Denmark. He had a prominent role at court, connected with diplomatic affairs, with foreign ambassadors, and with court entertainments. So, in a short time, politicians who craved an appointment with the Queen learned that the way to Florio's heart and his sponsorship was through the exchange of books. And this is attested by an important event that took place in Italy in October 68, the marriage between the Grand Duke Cosimo de' Medici, the Prince of Tuscany, with Maria Maddalena, Archduchess of Austria. Florio asked a Tuscan ambassador to send him a report from Italy about the festivities occurred during the wedding. And 1 year later, he asked another ambassador, Giorgio Giustinian, a Venetian ambassador, to send him this book about the wedding and about the festivities occurred during the wedding. This book turned out to be an important source for two Ben Jonson's masks, the Mask of Queens and Vision of Delight. So the desire to have detailed information about the Medici wedding, both by Lotti and by the Venetian ambassador, shows John Florio as Jonson's friend and collaborator, who refashioned the Italian revels for the English court and played a central role with both foreign ambassadors and with English dramatists. But in particular, Florio's friendship with Ben Jonson is of great interest and important because it is well attested by an inscription found in another book that belonged to John Florio's lost library. It is a copy of Volpone that contains a handwritten dedication by Ben Jonson, who describes John Florio as his loving father and worthy friend and the aid of his muses. The word father, which the dramatist uses in addressing his friends, suggests not just the disparity of their ages, but it most importantly implies some suggestion of discipleship, with a most striking tribute by speaking of Florio as the aid of his muses. This dedication implies that Florio played a fundamental part in Jonson's theatre writing that today has not been fully investigated. It has been generally assumed that Florio played the part of the teacher, of the intermediator, who supplied his friends of banal information by Italian language or Italian folklore. But if we look at John Florio's library again, in addition to works on religious, linguistic, medicine, philosophy, Florio's collection had a special focus on theatrical works. The majority of books, in fact, in Florio's library are plays. 14 citations alone, or 1/6 of his library, are sources from Pietro Aretino, which highlight his interest in theatrical texts and in Aretino erotic and sexual content. There are many commedia dell'arte works, many comedies, tragedies, tragicomedies and pastoral comedies that serve to broaden both his personal and intellectual curiosity and his connection with the theatre world in early modern London. There is a last manuscript that has been uncovered from Florio's lost library. Is a small part of the unbound volume of David's written collections and rhapsodies that Florio cites in his testament. Is a manuscript that contains 2 poems that Florio wrote as a gift to Queen Anne of Denmark. They are 2 Italian poems, and they are the only example of Italian and humanistic poetry addressed to the English sovereign. The same manuscript also contains a pastoral poem that I had the honor and pleasure to discover at the British Library. It's written in a beautiful, elegant hand, and it's inspired by Torquato Tasso tragic comedy Aminta. This manuscript unveils a new, extraordinary side of Florio's multifaceted personality, because it's a hint that his career as tutor, linguist, translator was just a fragment of a much intriguing and gifted genius at the center of a sophisticated and cultural vibrant community. In concluding remarks, this research represents just a first attempt to reconstruct the history of John Florio's lost library. Through the traces left in these books and manuscripts that I have shown you, they shed a light on his working method, his connection with several protagonists of early modern era, And arranging his library by genre, it was disclosed his fondness for theatre, also testified by his collaboration with early modern dramatists. Moreover, new evidences traced in one of his lost manuscripts prove his less known talent as anonymous poet who flattered his patrons with Italian poems. Only by the most painstaking scholarship it is possible to discover new books from Florio's beloved library that languish unrecognized on obscure shelves, but it will fully uncover the modes and forms of his varied literary activities, enabling us to eavesdrop on close encounters of this brilliant, complex Renaissance personality. Thank you.